Welcome everybody to our webinar. Thank you very much for joining us wherever you are in the world. I saw some of the attendees on the list, and we've got people, I think, as far as Thailand. So it must be pretty late for you guys out there, but thanks very much for joining us. I see there's some people over in Cyprus in UK. I'm based out in the Middle East. I'm in Dubai, and my name's James Mitchell. I'm going to be introducing you today to a very interesting investment proposition from a company called Yield Investing. Now, before I hand over to my colleague Luke, who's going to run through this proposition for you, just want to let you know that what we usually do on these webinars is we mute people, and there's not an option to unmute, unfortunately, because we have quite a large number of participants. So what I would love to ask you to do is, if you have questions, we really want your questions, and we really would like to address them, but please, could you just pop them in the Q&A or in the chat? And what we'll do is we'll keep an eye on that. If it's relevant to what we're actually discussing at that moment in time, we'll tackle it. Otherwise, we'll save it for the Q&A session, which we'll allocate at the end of the session. Now, we usually expect these webinars to be about 30 minutes long, and then a bit of time for Q&A after that. So we are going to be pretty direct and to the point and run through things as concisely as we possibly can, okay? So we don't want to keep you here or bore you to death with a very long and drawn out webinar and a bunch of slides. We want to keep it to the point. Just to give you an introduction about what we're going to be talking about, Yield Investing is the name of this company, and it kind of pretty much says what it does on the tin. These are not particularly, I would say, glamorous or sophisticated investments in terms of what you're buying here. This is a real estate, it's a property investment, but what it is a very, very good, secure, highly profitable income from an investment in something that's very, very ethical. Okay, so and the entry point is fairly low for most investors. So this is a proposition that for people that are looking for something ethical, something that gives a very, very good return, and something that has some assurances in terms of the long term, because as we probably all know, investing in buy-to-let property in general can be quite a headache, and you take a lot of chances, especially if you're a smaller investor with a small portfolio and you don't have a company managing this for you. So this will hopefully solve all of those problems. Now, I'm going to hand over to Luke Challis, who's the head for the region for Yield Investing. He's going to take you through the proposition, and we're also going to talk to you about some of the actual projects that are available today. There's quite a small, let's say, number of different available units and things, so these tend to be fairly high turnover. So what you see today, if you're interested today, is available today, but give it a week, 2 weeks time, they might be already gone, and there'll be new properties replacing these that sort of fit the same format here. Okay, so over to you, Luke. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the session today and you find it useful.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, James. I don't think you could have summed it up much better from who we are as a company. So I'll introduce myself, but I'm Luke Challis, as James mentioned, look after the global sales for Yield Investing. And really, to jump into it for you guys, we are a property investment company which offer an ethical investment model purely to help obtain long-term leases in the UK, rather than you as an owner having to worry about the day-to-day management of a property investment, because they do come with headaches, tenancy issues, and if some things are off plan, what we wanted to do as an investment was provide an investor with something that is a long-term rental assurance with a local housing association. It's already up and running, completed, nothing is off plan, and it's a full hands-free solution for a client. And then probably the last main benefit of the investment is that it's actually a long-term hedge against inflation, because your rental income is linked to CPI. So you will have an annual review annually, which I'll go into as well. One thing to also mention about ourselves is we are the full solution for you. So we are the actual construction and the development team on the ground in the UK. So our business partners in the UK, they form this for you. We renovate the property and then we apply the lease in place. So you as an investor are buying the full packaged solution. So how does this product work? So social housing is a concept that's been around in the UK since kind of around the 50s, 60s. And basically, anybody in the UK that is in need of support from the government is entitled to go to them and request for supported housing. So the type of tenants that we are working with in this case can vary anywhere from blue-collar workers who have just lost their jobs, all the way to the elderly, people that are in need of that specialized care, disabled, homeless people, and the list kind of varies. The organizations that are looking after the properties on behalf of the owner, and then they also look after the tenant, are local charities or housing associations, and they are non-for-profit organizations. So they take the rent from central government, they look after the properties for you and look after the tenants. All you have to do as a landlord is receive your rental income. So there's absolutely zero involvement whatsoever. To give you a clue on the vulnerable tenant types, here are some examples that we do currently work with. And how this works from our point of view with the housing association is because we're often working with a higher level of care, we are able to obtain a higher level of rent coming from the UK government. So if you were to take one of our properties and compare it to the house next door, we would actually get sort of 30 to 40% higher rents than what that property would be able to achieve because of the level of care that is required for the tenant involved. So they're looking at 20, 30 hours of specialized care from the care workers, which means they can get more support from the government to help them look after the tenants, meaning you as an investor are receiving a higher amount of rent than you would on the open market. So why is this even a thing? Why does the government even offer this kind of initiative? Basically, if any of you are aware with the local news or any of the news that comes out of the UK, there's a lot of talk at the moment about the cost of living crisis and all of the money that is being spent on temporary accommodation. As of the start of 2020, end of 2022, the UK government was spending £1.6 billion per year on temporary accommodation. And this is hotel accommodation and Airbnbs. And what they have to do is, because they have an obligation to house people that are in need of support, they're having to put them up into emergency room rates. So they're paying £100 to £150 per night and giving these people 3 meals a day in order to help them get off the streets. What we give the government is a long-term solution where we offer them a long-term property which has been purpose-built for these type of tenants. So if it's a disabled person, if it's a victim of domestic abuse, whatever it may be, they'll get the specialized care that they need, but we take it on a 5 to 25 year rental agreement. The benefit to the government is that they will actually then be paying sort of £100 to £150 per week rather than the same per night. So for them, it's a much better long-term solution that they want to give to the tenants in place. I'll touch on kind of the market itself and why this is kind of working for a lot of institutional investors. And the main reason why I mentioned before is the fact that the rental income itself is linked to CPI. So it's linked to inflation. And if you could have imagined some of the largest names in the world of financial banking, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Schroders, Blackstone, they are all looking for investments that are ultimately backed by the UK government, and it offers them a hedge against inflation. This is the perfect solution for them because they know that their income is assured and it's a completely hands-free model for them to get involved with. Hence why up to 2022, there's been over £10 billion invested into this market from these institutional clients. And now some of the largest REITs in the UK are only social housing. So Triple Point, Civitas, Home REIT, their REITs are specifically for social housing because of the ease that it gives to them. as an institution. So breaking down the actual investment itself, you are buying a property in the UK the same way as you would buy any other residential asset. The difference here is rather than renting it out to the private sector, you're renting it out to a local housing association who are then taking on the full responsibility. So usually when you buy a property, and if you're thinking of somebody that's living in Thailand, the Middle East, America, anywhere in the world, you would have to generally have a property and lettings management company doing the work for you, managing the tenant, and this comes at a cost. You then would have to take into consideration any tenant damage and maintenance that has to be done on that property, any ground rent, any service charges. These are all costs that you will have to take on as a landlord. With this investment, the exact figure that you receive from the housing association is your net yield. So there's no other costs associated for you. All of the tenant damage and maintenance is all covered as part of the lease agreement, all of your property management, and it's a minimum 5-year rental agreement with no break clause in place. After the 5 years, you will have an option to renew the lease and carry on again for a further 5 years. This way, it gives the investor the assurance they know they've got a guaranteed income coming in rather than trying to rent it out to the private sector. And because we are offering support for different types of tenants and we can obtain more of a higher rent from the UK government, this allows us to get a much higher yield than you would get from a typical private investment where you have to think of maintenance costs, ground rent, service charges, lettings fees. You don't have any of that associated with these properties. In terms of an overseas investor and how the end-to-end service works, from us as a company, we are here to support you every step of the way. So it is a cash investment. You can't obtain mortgages on these. And the reason for that is because due to the nature of the tenant and the fact that you're getting a long-term lease, the housing association, they want to know that that property is bought outright and they don't need to worry about the landlord defaulting on the mortgage and having to give the property back to the bank, and then they need to move a tenant out. They want to know that it's paid off, secure, so that they're not worrying about that. We take you through the full legal process. So you go through solicitors in the UK, the same way you would buy any normal residential property. And it is a simultaneous exchange and completion, which usually takes around 4 to 6 weeks. And everything is in place for you as an investor. So as I said before, it's already up and running. We already own the units. We are just transferring the ownership to you in your name, and you will start earning your rental income from that very first month of when you exchange and you own the property. So to take you into the properties themselves, the main, obviously, objective of our company, what we're trying to offer you is a fully hands-free, but ultimately a high-yielding property investment. And the reason why we operate in the areas that we do is because that's where we can obtain higher rents from the government, and also it works from a yield perspective. So everything that we offer is a minimum of an 8% net yield. So this is a recent block that we have in Middlesbrough, starting from £89,750, and it comes with a 10-year lease in place. As James mentioned, the houses do come and go very quickly. So we launched this block around 10 days ago, and all the units in orange have gone. But as you can see, there's still units varying from the lowest entry level all the way up to the more expensive. Effectively, with this type of investment, what you're doing is you're buying a secured income that's backed by real estate. So in theory, the more that you spend on the property, the more that you'll get your rental income. It's really, a lot of the time we work it backwards. If a client says to us, I've got £115,000, what can I buy with that? Or I want to earn this amount of income, what can I get? That's usually how it's worked out, because once you've seen one property, they're all very, very, very similar. And to kind of show you an example of that, so this is one of the studios that is currently available. Everything that you see in the apartment comes with the apartment. So because it's up and running and ready for a tenant already in place, you're buying it furnished, and literally the day that you exchange, the tenant is already in place. So that's how you start earning your rental income straight away. In order for us to get the lease on the property with the housing association, It's had to have been renovated to a certain standard. And that's why they are in this condition that they're in. So to give you another example of the units in this position, the white goods all come included with the apartments. So you can see here the sort of stuff that is included. And what I meant earlier by the FRI lease and the maintenance cover is that all of the white goods, all of the furniture is all protected for you as a landlord. So if a tenant was to damage the table, the chair, any of the white goods, you are protected and it has to be replaced for by the housing association. So it's really as risk-free as possible for you to not have to worry about those types of things, because if any of you have ever owned property before, no matter how good the tenant is, these things can still happen. Then we move on to the houses that we have. So these are starting from a 2-bedroom terraced house all the way up to a 5-bedroomed house as well. Very similar concept, exactly the same. The only difference here is that you're buying a house rather than a block of apartments. So the furniture all comes included, white goods, bedroom, wardrobes, and these have been fully renovated. So from the outside, it looks like a very standard, normal terraced house that you would see in the UK. The difference here is that on the inside, it's been purposely renovated for that tenant to move in place. So it has the furniture, brand new white goods, and everything for us to have the lease for you. And to give you a breakdown of how the numbers would look, this is a 2-bedroom property in Hartlepool. It's given you a 9% yield. And as I said, your rental income and your figure, that is your net figure. You haven't got to worry about any of those ground rent service charges that you will have. For you guys to just be made aware, when you are buying property in the UK as an overseas investor, there is a stamp duty tax that you will pay. So there is an estimated additional cost that you have with property in the UK. That's any property that you buy. It always depends on the investor. If you own property already, you pay a slightly higher rate. But in this case, that will always depend. So it's something to keep in mind. Usually around 3% is the figure I would keep in your head just for additional costs. Then moving on to a 3-bedroom. As I said, we are the developer. We have the construction team. So once you've seen one property, they're all very, very, very similar. The kitchens will be exactly the same, furniture very similar, carpet, fridge. So the only difference here is that it's a 3-bedroom property, so it's slightly more expensive because it earns more in rental income, and it comes with the same lease in place. For some of the other investors, which do come around as well, and we work with a lot of institutional clients, there is certain people that are looking for a larger portfolio in this case. So Hanover Point is a 31-unit block located in Stockton-upon-Tees, just under 3.5 million. This one has a 10-year lease in place, and it's a 7% net yield. So the whole thing is all wrapped together. These are some options that we do have for clients or institutional investors that are looking on this scale as well. So for any of you that haven't gone through a purchase process of how to buy property from overseas, the first step would be picking your unit, so what you are interested in, and then you pay a £5,000 reservation fee. This is to take the unit offline so that another client couldn't take it. And then we engage you with the solicitors in the UK. That's so that they check the property on your behalf. They make sure that the property is in order, it has the lease in place, and the lease is exactly what we're saying it's to be. And they are also checking that you, as an investor, do pass the relevant checks to buy property in the UK. The next step is the exchange of contracts, and you pay the remaining amount for the property, which usually takes around 4 to 6 weeks. And then the last step is you receive your title deed and you start to earn your rental income. And that's pretty much everything from my side of things. So if there is any questions, now's a great time to cover them off.
Yeah, thank you very much, Luke. I think it's really exciting. When I heard about this originally, I thought that this would be something that as a company we would really embrace, because what we're doing in general as financial advisors and wealth managers is help people plan for their future and generate an income. And the biggest thing they need to generate an income for in most cases is when they want to give up work and retire. And you know, this fits in really nicely as a long-term secure investment for somebody, I think, who's approaching a retirement or just wants now to have something where they're getting an income which is far better than cash in the bank, and will give them a good opportunity in the long run with the growth of that income, because it's as Luke was saying, linked to inflation. So we're really backing this, and we think it's a fantastic opportunity. Look, there are some questions that have come up in the Q&A and in the chat. So I think we'll spend a few minutes to go through that, and then what we usually do after these calls is the following day, whoever invited you from wherever you are in the world, your local Holborn advisor would be in touch with you and basically see if you want to set up a one-to-one, and it can be with Luke if necessary, if you want to talk to him and get more details. And Luke and the team are really helpful, very forthcoming. If anyone wants to see, for instance, draft contracts, draft tenancy agreements with the housing association, that sort of thing, they're all available for you to look at, scrutinize, and everything else. Let's move on. We'll tackle some of these questions, Luke, if we can. So yeah. I think we have a question here from an anonymous attendee, which I think has come up a lot with people that I've introduced this to, and that is, can the property be sold at any time, or do you have to wait until the lease contract is up?
Yeah, it's a very common question. So it's the same as any property investment. The lease is fully transferable, so you can sell the investment at any time you like. Because there is a tenant in place, you would have to sell it to another investor. But in this case, we could help assist, as we have a line of investors that are looking for these properties. We could help assist the sale of the property for you, or it can be listed the same way as a normal tenanted property, and you can sell it on the market in that way. After the lease is finished, which I think is something that a few people do ask, we always advise that you renew the lease and you carry it on, and then you sell it with the lease in place, because it's more attractive to an investor with the lease in place rather than without the lease.
Okay, I think that there's a question from Archana here asking that question: what happens after the lease expires? But I mean, what happens if after, let's say, 5 years or 10 years, or even if it's a longer lease that's agreed from the start, the housing association then decides to pull the plug? I mean, is that something that could happen? What's the likelihood of that, do you think?
So the housing associations that we work with have a very demonstrable track record of, for the last 5 years, they've never missed a rent payment. And what they want to do is, there's been 1.2 million people on the waiting list for these houses since 1997, and that list is getting larger every year. So they need these houses from us more drastically than we're building them. So what they do, after 5 or 10 years, your lease will be renewed, and you'll have the option to renew it in place. There's no fee to do that. Your relationship is directly with the housing association, so you can do that with them. You renew the lease and you carry on earning your income. The good thing to note here is that by the time you are in year 10, your yield would have increased from sort of 9 to 11% because of that link to inflation. So it does give you that good benefit. Now, if you were thinking worst case scenario, what happens if the housing association isn't able to continue the rent? So it is a no break clause contract, so they are obliged to pay it for you. But if you were looking at a worst case scenario, in this position, there's other housing associations in the local area that would have to be housing these tenants. You know, they can't just go and put these tenants in situ on the street. If it was disabled people, whatever their circumstance may be, there will be a housing association or a charity that will be able to house them. In that case, we would be able to act on your behalf and get you a lease put in place within the housing association.
And I hope that answers that one, Chana. We've got one more question now relating to the furniture. Okay, so those properties you mentioned come furnished. What happens if the furniture gets worn out or needs replacing or anything? Because obviously that's not normal maintenance or damage, it's just normal wear and tear, which obviously over a period of 10 years is likely to happen. Whose responsibility is that, Luke?
So the full responsibility of the maintenance and repairs on the internal of the property is the sole responsibility of the tenant in place, which is the housing association. So what I mean, if the furniture over 10 years begins to degrade, as you said, general wear and tear, it still has to be replaced for by the housing association, because their agreement states that they have to maintain the property to the exact standard that they've taken it on in.
Right. So your tenant is not actually the person who's living there, it's always the housing association.
Yeah,
So that,
correct.
Who's living there and how long they're living there and what they do there is really not your business or your concern.
Exactly, yeah.
And is this the same with insurance and things like that? Maybe like boiler maintenance and all of these other things that, I have 3 properties in the UK and I'm constantly getting billed for, the boiler inspection or, some kind of, certificate that I need or something. Is that something that you're going to face at all in this 10-year period?
So the only thing that you have to pay for initially is the yearly building insurance, which is roughly around about £30 a month for the building insurance. That covers the boiler, and if a storm was to come and blow the roof off, it covers you there. So the building insurance covers you for that. Everything else is covered for by the housing association.
All right. Okay. So I've got another question from Phil here. I think Phil might have missed the beginning, but I don't know if you want to address this. He's asking if these properties are mortgageable. So we did tackle that earlier, right, Luke?
Yeah, I mentioned
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the reason for it is because they don't want to have to move a tenant out of there due to circumstances that are not in their own control. So if they're helping a tenant go through a rehabilitation process, and then you as a landlord default on the mortgage and they have to repossess the property, it messes up with their long-term solution. So they prefer it to be a cash investment.
All right. Okay. So there's another anonymous question here. How do you, if someone's interested in that, how do they book a property? What's the next step? What do they need to do?
So the best thing to do is we have 2 live availability spreadsheets where it's constantly getting updated with properties that are being put onto the spreadsheet. It'd be best to book in a call with myself if they wanted to do that, or any of their advisors. And then they would go through the process. They pick a unit out, and then they would sign a reservation form, and you pay a £5,000 reservation fee. And then they would enter into the legal process of buying the property.
Right. Do they actually have to visit the UK at all during the whole process of this, or can the whole thing be done remotely?
So the whole thing can be done remotely. I'd say 99.9% of everyone we've had do this has done it remotely. If you really, really wanted to go to the UK and look at the property, there's absolutely nothing stopping you. You can do that, but this is the whole point that we exist, and you guys at Holborn are here as well to assist, is that the whole process can be done all electronically. All
right. Okay. Good. So, okay, there's another question just popped up about inflation and earnings, and what happens if the economy improves and things get better? Does the earnings improve? Again, I think you've covered that with the CPI, the inflation, but just cover that again if you can, because I think people will see they will see the earnings increasing over time. This is right, isn't it?
Exactly. So your income, basically in the private sector, rents can go up on a yearly basis, but you trying to go back to a tenant to say, rents have gone up £50, you need to be paying me £50 more, or I'll get a new tenant, doesn't really work that easily. As you probably know, it's very difficult to try and have that conversation. With this, you have an annual review, and your rent will increase in line with CPI. So depending on the level, your rent will increase in line with that. So each year, your rent will increase at the same rate as inflation is going up, plus 4%.
So if in case if the CPI drops and there's deflation, which we know is very rare, but people do fear it, Would that have a negative impact on the rent, or is the rent fixed at the previous year's price in this instance?
It's always fixed at the last rate that it was at. So if you go up to 10%, it won't ever go back below that.
Yeah, well, I think it's still an extremely good yield, especially because it's net and it's turnkey. Okay, there's another question here, and this is my question as well that I had when I first was introduced to this. What's the best exit strategy for someone who's investing into this in the long run?
So the exit strategy that I would be looking at on this is that, in theory, it should be a lot easier than a typical rented unit. So let's say you're in year 5 and you want to sell the property out. You've had your fun with it. You've got 5 years of demonstrable rental income coming in, and you can prove that to the next investor. And like I said, we can help assist with that. You can show a client, I've been receiving an 8-9% yield from this property. You can take it off me in that place. And that means that, irrelevant of what the market does, you're buying this property based on its income. The next investor is buying it based on its income. So you know that it's always going to maintain its value because it's earning the same income. So in that case, that's the attractive side. So you can sell it at any time. Alternatively, we have the option where we aggregate every year a large portfolio of stock for an institutional client. If you wanted to put your property into that portfolio, we would take it back off you for the price that you bought it at, and we would put it into our portfolio if you wanted to get rid of it.
Essentially, every, like, you know, on an annual basis or whenever, periodically, investors would be asked if they want the, you know, the purchase price of their property back, and obviously then they get their money back plus the income that they've received over the time that they've held it for. So I guess it's still fairly attractive if you want to do that. No, but I do see the angles there, so that's good. Okay, so we've got another question about the property valuation. Is it valued at, is it priced at a fair market value? So again, you know, we've had this before when we've done these sessions, and I've had this from my clients. So I think if you could explain this, this would also be. It's a very good question. Thanks for that one.
Yeah, definitely. So how the pricing has worked out, it's effectively done backwards from the rental income that's being received. That's why it's all based on these real figures that we're receiving. So compared to the house next door that's receiving, let's say our property is receiving £10,000 a year in rent. The house next door is only receiving £5,000 a year in rent. To an investor, our property is going to be worth more because it's earning you more money, the same way anything works. So it's always going to be more expensive than another property on the street, but that is because it's got a 10-year guaranteed rental income coming in and it's earning you more money. So the prices is based upon the amount of money that it's earning. And also the actual value of it, probably the biggest benefit of it is that it has nothing to do with the market. So even if property prices dropped by 10, 15%, your property is still earning that same rental income. So to an investor, it still holds that same yield. So when you sell it on, you're still selling it for a 9% yield. So it holds its value compared to other properties.
So, I mean, it's like buying a property at the fair market value, basically the property next door, spending, you know, whatever it is to refurnish it, modernize it, whatever else needs doing. Because I know a lot of those type of properties are in, you know, fairly poor state of repair. So you're completely renovating it, furnishing it, getting a contract in place with the housing association, and all of that, you know, all of that value, if you like, that you're sort of spending on it is essentially what the markup is, I guess, which essentially comes back to you in the form of a higher rental yield.
Exactly. Yeah, you summed it up perfectly. You know, if you were to buy a pitch, you know, a field of grass that was mud and you couldn't do anything with it, it earned you £1 a week, but somebody else had put seeds in it and it grew grass and you could sell the crops. Of course, the one that has had investment into it and it has a more return is more attractive. So it's exactly like that.
All right. Now, I have a question here from Chris, and he's asking if there's any other options. And we have quite a few questions as well about, you know, properties in other parts of the country. I know you specialise predominantly in the northeast. I think obviously that's where there tends to be a higher demand for this type of property in general, but there is a demand for these all over the country. But you don't, right? I mean, you specialise in that part of the country where, you know, the purchase prices are lower and the turnaround is probably a bit faster. Any scope to, you know, do anything in other parts of the country, perhaps in the higher kind of value locations?
So we've had a lot of options in West Yorkshire, Leeds and these kind of areas. However, the concept of yield investing wouldn't really be very good if we didn't get the yields as high as we do. To try and do this in London or Manchester is impossible because you can't get anywhere near the yields and you'd have to pay a lot more for the property. So we do mainly operate in the northeast, but from time to time, we will get some that come up in Yorkshire and those surrounding areas as well.
Right. Okay. All right. Lee. Well, I mean, anyone who wants to discuss any type of property investments in general, they can speak to their advisor at Holborn, because Holborn has a property division, and we do have properties throughout the UK and all of the prime locations at all price points. Okay. So this is one that's particularly attractive for people looking for yield, as we've discussed, and also security, because you have the government-backed assured tenancy contracts in place. But there are all sorts of other options, so we'd love to discuss them with you if this doesn't quite fit the bill for you guys. So, you know, this is something that when we do a follow-up, just bring to our attention and that. But there's okay, we've got one more question just popped up here. I'm not sure if no. So we discussed the buyback and this, you know, syndication of properties and then selling on institutionally. Okay, is that guaranteed? Is the option for a buyback guaranteed?
Yeah, so we can give them an option in writing, whereby as long as they can hold it for a certain period of time, if we get the property, if we get an institutional investor come in, then if they want the option to put it into that portfolio, we can give them that. So we can offer that in writing, yeah.
All right. Okay. There's another one. What rights have you got as an owner to be able to terminate the contract early if you wanted to? Is there any, if it's a 5-year, is there an exit clause on there on either party side?
Yeah, so it's a no break clause on both sides. So
you would mentioned that at the beginning, right?
Yeah. So you'd have to wait out. Yeah.
So you would sell it with the lease in place to another investor, or you wait and then when it comes to option time,
exactly.
You know, you sell it on, or you obviously, you know, if you can syndicate it and sell it back to you at the purchase price.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or if you really wanted to, at the end of the day, I wouldn't advise that somebody did this, but you've got to remember you are still owning a physical real estate asset in the UK. So even if you didn't want to put the lease back in place and you said, I'm going to try and sell it to an end user, if you didn't want to renew the lease, that is always an option. I wouldn't expect that you would get as much for it because it wouldn't earn you as much income as with the lease in place, but you're still going to get a return on it. And that is always an option.
Okay. Do you have the option as well to have a longer term contract at the beginning, or is that kind of enforced upon you based on the unit that you're buying? Or can you choose? You can say like, I want 5, 10, 15, 20, whatever.
Basically, it's a 5-year rolling contract. So in theory, it is genuinely a 25-year lease in the background. The reason why we don't give you a 25-year lease is because you would pay an additional rate of stamp duty for any lease that's longer than 7 years in length. So it's a way of us breaking the lease down so that you don't pay an additional rate of stamp duty. Because if you do that, your yield is then compromised as a result.
All right. Okay. One thing, I'm a financial advisor, so I deal a lot with UK tax questions from people. So if you are a British investor and you're purchasing one of these properties, or for that matter, if you're a foreign investor but you're from the EEA or the European Union, you'll be entitled to what is known as a personal allowance, which you can offset against the first 12,800 and something pounds of your rental income, which is obviously very good because a lot of these are below that. And you also have other tax breaks and things there. You can't escape the tax on the stamp duty, and there's also capital gains tax on the disposal of property investments now. So we can talk to you about all that. But this, in general, we would, if someone has a portfolio, this would be the kind of buy and hold element of it. And if they were looking at more short-term investments, that would be a different set of solutions altogether. We've got another question come up about whether the properties are freehold or leasehold here, Luke.
Yeah, so all of the houses that you saw, so on the second spreadsheet of availability, they will always be freehold. The block of apartments that we have in Middlesbrough, they are a 250-year leasehold. So any apartments that we get, they'll always be a 250-year minimum leasehold, but the houses, they're complete freehold.
Right. All right. Okay, look, I think we're going to take any last questions now, and then we'll wrap things up for the evening. So, anybody else have anything else they want to just ping in the chat before we close off this session tonight? I think okay. I think now we've gone over our 30 minutes, and we're now kind of keeping some of you guys up quite late in the evening. So thank you ever so much for joining us tonight. We'll be doing webinars like this in the coming weeks. So anyone who's attended tonight will get invitations to what's coming up in the future. And we will be in touch with you within the next 24 hours just to give you a follow-up call and see if you have any questions or queries. If you do want further information and you can't wait till then, you can just drop us an email back on, you would have received your confirmation messages from your Zoom. So just drop it back on there or come back to our website. But thank you very much, everyone, for your time this evening. Thank you, Luke, for giving us a good introduction to what you guys do. And I love it. I think I'm sold. I think it's a great investment opportunity. And have a great evening, everybody. Thank you.